Welcome to the Game Changers Collective podcast. I am Cassi Manner, your host. I own Game Changer Marketing Solutions, and I've built a following over 500,000 followers across social media platforms. I'm very excited to share with you my group of game changers and who I really see as industry leaders in their space. Today we have on Joseph Portale. He is a corporate law attorney and he is going to be telling us all about the things that business owners should know going into business. Maybe they've been in business for a long time. Maybe they've been using ChatGPT or outsourcing to attorneys. He's really going to help us see the, mistakes you want to avoid and how you can really use the law to your advantage in entrepreneurship. Tell us a little bit about your background, what you do, how you got into corporate law. I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, so I'm a corporate specialist as an attorney. You can be quite general with your practice or quite specific in your practice. I went to Santa Clara University for 7 years in a row, getting my undergraduate degree in business and my corporate law degree with a high-tech law certificate. Santa Clara, if you don't know, is in the Silicon Valley, which is near all the big tech companies like Apple and Salesforce and Oracle. So studying business at undergraduate business school and entrepreneurship in corporate law school really was the foundation unifying my ability to serve business owners and landowners in commercial real estate and whatever industry they might be in, whether I'm working in business litigation, corporate contracts, transactional work, contract revision, or corporate compliance, corporate advising. Essentially, my business law degree and my corporate specialty combined to put me in a good position to advise folks who are looking to grow their business, build value, and protect their assets. There's a lot that goes into risk mitigation, a lot that goes into revising and negotiating contracts that grow the value for those business owners.
Beautiful. And so, I mean, I work with hundreds of business owners every year. I know that you work with many as well. And so, what would you say you'll start with the easy thing, someone's starting a business for the first time. What do they need to know, right? Like contracts, law, copyright, anything like that. If they're starting a business, what are kind of the places you'd want them?
Yeah. So I think the most common thing for business owners where they have a startup, right? They get really attached to this word startup and they're like, well, it's a startup, so I can't spend any money on legal services. And so what they do is they find really cheap legal services through a platform or a software or a service that doesn't really do a good job for them. And it just causes major problems later. So it's really common for a new entrepreneur to say, okay, they're going to go to this website that has cheap template documents. They're going to pay a really low fee and they're going to get access to all these documents that basically don't match what the person is doing. So that's very dangerous, right? Because if your operating agreement for your LLC or your articles of incorporation for your corporation do not reflect what you're actually doing with your business, then later it can look like you were not complying with your own governing documents, right? So in other words, they take the quick route to pay the lowest amount of money they can for documents that they think technically satisfies a requirement of starting a business like an LLC or a corporation. And then they're immediately violating the terms of their own governing documents because they don't know what the documents say. The documents don't fit their individual case specific situation. And so now as they're operating their business, they're actually breaking their own contracts to their business. They're breaking their own agreements with, contracts I'm using loosely, but they're breaking their own agreements with the rules of how to govern their own LLC or corporation or whatever that type of business is. So from the start, I see entrepreneurs taking risks in the form of cutting costs by essentially saying that they don't need legal services by doing it themselves in a cheap cookie cutter way that eventually causes them major problems because they don't actually have the correct documents and the documents don't write the things that they should say about what the business is doing and how the business actually operates.
And so, say a little bit more about these operating agreements. What does that look like? Where would they want to start?
Yeah, I mean, you should start with hiring an attorney, right? A lot of people, more and more, you find entrepreneurs who are, leaning heavily on AI. They're really strongly leaning on ChatGPT and other AI softwares. But I think most people, they probably only know of ChatGPT so far. And especially if they're not paying for the really, really advanced versions of ChatGPT, you've seen a lot of examples of hallucinations. where the AI is programmed to agree with the user, and the AI is programmed to pretend that it has an answer, even when it doesn't have an answer. And so, especially with entrepreneurs who are taking risks, they're cutting costs, they think they know everything, and they want to be at a point in society where they don't need lawyers. And some of that might be that they don't like lawyers, or that they don't want to have to spend money on lawyers, or that they feel frustrated by the academic paradigm between higher education and graduate degrees and people who go out and start businesses. But what I see over and over in my experience is business owners looking for that moment, that aha moment. We finally don't need lawyers. We have this widget that replaces the law. It just gives you the answer, right? But there's really not clear, concrete answers for a lot of parts of law. It's risk management and strategy, and building growth with decisions. In the sophistication of your documents, in the structure of your business itself. So I just really don't think we're anywhere near a point where you can say that AI has replaced attorneys. If anything, I think you should have a law degree and a license to practice to even try to use AI correctly for practicing law, because I think it causes way bigger problems for people who don't know what they're doing because they didn't go to law school and they didn't pass the bar exam.
Yeah, I think that's so important to touch on with AI, right? I think everybody's used to their ChatGPT like gassing them up, right? They're like, yeah, you're right, they're wrong, 100% agree with you. And that's very dangerous, especially, with the law in particular. So, let's start with kind of my business for an example. I just started as a freelancer, like a lot of entrepreneurs do. I was kind of solopreneuring it, doing everything myself. I didn't have contracts, I didn't have an attorney. And then when we actually began doing some work together, it helped me take my business to, a totally different level just because of the way that I was able to see opportunity and kind of work with you together to, create avenues in my business for more revenue that didn't necessarily exist before. So say you've got an existing business owner, right? They've been kind of solopreneuring it, doing everything themselves. They're paying the bills, maybe they're growing, they're scaling. They're kind of at that point where they're really becoming a business. And so they haven't done anything before. They don't have any contracts. They're the service providers, a marketing agency or web design agency, coaching, consulting, anything like that. Where do they go next? How do you kind of start working with someone who's kind of already set in their ways, but they know that there's opportunity for growth? They don't know how to take that next step.
I think and it's a great question, but I think the most important thing that business owners look to, and what you and I looked at, is the long-term growth of the company by creating recurring revenue with long-term commitments with clients. So if a business owner is now in the green financially, or at least seeing some traction in building, a tangible business that's showing value and not losing money, then encouraging long-term commitments between partners or clients, or depending on how the business is structured, whether it's B2B or B2C or both. Every place where the company makes money is an opportunity to build in long-term commitments with industry partners or clients or both. And then that's where, the word for word design of every contract, every agreement, every partnership, every use of the intellectual property becomes super important, because that's what's going to determine the long-term trajectory of the value of the business and its assets, and the sustainability of that income. So who's going to get the income from a business that operates with intellectual property and multiple clients and multiple partners? It comes down to what those contracts say, comes down to what the operating agreement says for the LLC, the articles of incorporation for a corporation. And so those governing documents is what we call them. They need to be structured in a way that benefit the right person, or a lot of things can happen. There can be disagreements and disputes over who owns the intellectual property. There can be disagreements and disputes over who has rights to the recurring revenue. There can be disagreements and disputes about the timeline, how long these people have to be doing business or buying products or engaged in long-term income and sales. So having an attorney look at those contracts and those governing documents and revising them, improving them, and getting them very clear about who is entitled to what prevents the unfortunate likelihood of litigation, of lawsuits down the road, where a lot of entrepreneurs think, well, that's not going to happen, or they'll roll the dice, and eventually what they put themselves in a situation where the only solution is litigation. If someone has been operating their business for 20 years and they've been doing it in a way that is different than what the governing documents require, and they've been retaining money, like if they've been getting money in ways that they shouldn't have, or if they've been getting benefits in ways that the contracts don't allow, there's probably other people out in the world who feel entitled to those benefits or those monies or those assets. So it's basically a recipe for lawsuits and disagreements if you're not complying with your governing documents, and if you're not super clear about what those documents say and what you have to do to comply with those documents, right? Some people, compliance can be a major issue for entrepreneurs and business owners, whether they're in a partnership or a big LLC or corporation. A lot of people who are successful in business, they don't think that they need to comply with the rules of society or of the world, or spiritually or socially. So if you're not even complying with your own personal contracts that your company has, right, it's a recipe for litigation. It's a recipe for lawsuits, because when an entrepreneur or a business person says, well, the rules don't apply to me, that also means that the benefits and positives of a business arrangement to the other people besides that a selfish person, that starts to cause more and more damage, to the point where eventually it culminates in dispute resolution and usually a lawsuit. So you want to be really careful. You want to comply with your governing documents. You want to pay an attorney so that you're clear about what you have to do based on what those documents say. And you want to do it from the start so that you're not starting with documents that misstate and misrepresent what you're actually doing on a day-to-day basis with your new business. It's like if we were going to raise a puppy dog, right? And we're like, okay, this is going to be a dog. It's going to be a big dog. But we bought the dog a hamster cage, and we bought him hamster pellets, and we bought him a little like hamster bed, and the dog's laying on the bed, and the wheel's broken, right? And the dog doesn't fit in the cage. So the cage is all busted open. And it's like, why did you buy a hamster cage and a hamster wheel and hamster pellets and a little hamster water bottle feeding tube for this dog that's way too big for the cage and for all those supplies? And it's like, because you got the cheapest forms, right? You got the cheapest articles of incorporation that you could find online. That's just one cookie cutter thing that doesn't really fit what you're doing. A lot of entrepreneurs will start out knowing, okay, I need an LLC because there's pass-through taxation, right? So you're taxed like an individual, but there's limited liability because the LLCs, what they do is they limit liability to just the funds that are put into the company. So what they might not realize is that in order to start an LLC, a person has to file that LLC with a specific state. So they have to register the LLC with the Secretary of State for whatever state they're choosing. And then one of the documents they're going to have to file in order to create the LLC is an operating agreement. And the operating agreement is a list of rules and procedures and policies governing the LLC itself. So it'll say how many people own the LLC, how many members are in the LLC, if there's shareholders, if there's procedures to follow in operating income distributions, or what happens if somebody passes away or if someone sells out of the business. And so the operating agreement gives specific rules and circumstances of how the LLC is to be governed based on the intent and desires of the owners, of the people forming the LLC. And then the Articles of Incorporation is very similar, but for corporations. So if you want to file to create a corporation, you have to choose what state you're going to file it in, whether it's Delaware, California, or what have you. And then the Articles of Incorporation are a list of rules, and you have corporate bylaws, right? It's a list of rules, policies, bylaws, and circumstances that the owners and operators of the corporation are going to follow in the owning and operating of their new business.
So you mentioned forming your LLC in a particular state. I know that you are a California licensed attorney, but business owners all over the nation can work with you. Can you just say a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, so you want to work with a licensed attorney, and your legal needs might involve particular circumstances in a specific state. Like if you had a car accident, or you're going to trial, or if you're working on a lease in a place that's very specific, in a particular state. But it's also an opportunity for citizens, international citizens, non-US citizens can hire a United States attorney, and people in other states can hire attorneys from the state that they want to hire them from based on experience if they're working with what we call general principles of law. So that can be, general principles of contract law and business operation. Pretty much a lot of the corporate law and LLC law, business law is based on federal law. So it's laws that apply equally and the same in all 50 states. So some people who just don't know much about the legal industry and provision of legal services, they look for someone who is in the same state as them, but there might not be a lot of corporate attorneys in Wyoming or South Dakota. And so if you live in South Dakota and you can't find an attorney to take on your case or to work on your contracts, you can actually choose an attorney from New York because they're sophisticated in finance. You could choose an attorney in San Francisco or San Jose because of their sophistication in tech. And you have to make that decision knowingly, right? That's your choice to choose an attorney in that state. And then that attorney is going to work on general provisions, multi-state accepted general provisions and principles of law, such as contracts or indemnification clauses or things that are just generally considered in all the states, under federal law. And as a way of doing business so that people who own businesses or have legal needs can work with an attorney in a big booming economy with big schools and sophisticated legal practitioners who have experience with big businesses.
Okay, fantastic. And so if people would like to work with you, how is a good way for them to do that? If they have questions or you just want, an initial kind of discovery call, where can they get in touch?
So josephportale.com, just my first name and my last name.com is my website. That's JosephPortale.com. And you can send me an email right through my website. Just click the contact form and send me a message. And I'd be happy to give you an initial free 15-minute consultation to see if we're a good fit to work together. And basically, if you contact me through my website and we're a good fit for your legal needs and your business, then we'll have a quick get to know you conversation and we'll get working right away.
Beautiful. And so I always ask everyone, what is your game changing advice that really changed the game for you that you want to share with others, share with our audience, good piece of wisdom, advice?
I think really what changed the game for me was getting really honest with myself about the big picture, right? And so some people might find the big picture in a spiritual source. The word might be consciousness or the universe or God. I think really settling into a comfort zone with the big picture and a meaningful dialogue with the source of who you are and the source of who you want to be, what you have been, who you are now, and what you'll become, really merging with every layer of the universe. Really, each pillar of life itself is the only starting point. It's the only path to success is comfort with yourself and a stable certainty with who you are and what's out there.